Welcome to Innovative Strategies with Bill Hasse. Innovative Strategy is a show designed to help people with their business and personal financial literacy, but not in the way that you have known. This is not your grandpa's financial literacy, as Bill uses his 30 plus years in the financial industry to stretch your financial box from, let's say about a 30,000 foot view of things. Bill and his guests have helped hundreds of clients achieve and surpass their financial goals. If you have any questions, please email Bill at billhasse, that's Bill at billhasse.com. Reach out to him right here at 216thenet@gmail.com. All right, today we are following up on the CFO conversation with, of course, our good friend Nelson Tepfer. Bill, how are you?
I'm good, Ken. How you doing?
I am well, sir. Thank you.
Good Thanksgiving?
It was a good Thanksgiving. I got to sit in a log cabin up in Wisconsin and stare out at the woods, and it was awesome.
Nothing wrong with that. I traveled down to Dallas and was hoping for warmer weather and didn't find it.
Yeah.
So it was, we were all wearing jackets down there, but so it was still cool. But a great trip down there. Always enjoy it. Love the city. My kids are down there, so obviously enjoy that too. But now we're getting to wintertime here, right? I mean, it's 57 degrees yesterday, and today we have wind chills in the teens.
Yeah.
So we love this time of year here in good old Windy City, Chicago. But
I don't mind it. I don't mind it if I'm doing something, but if I'm just walking from my car to the office or the station, then it's really cold.
No, it's just a sign of age, Kent. That's all that is.
That's right.
But it's but we look forward. We're in that holiday mode now, right? And people kind of winding down a little bit here, and they, for business owners and such, you don't really ever get to wind down.
No.
Most of us are still very much in tune with what's going on, trying to wrap up this year, trying to make good plans for the coming year. And when you're making good plans, you better have a good CFO around to help you out. And not everybody can afford that, right? Not everybody can bring a CFO on. They don't know when to. They don't know how much it's going to cost. They don't know what are their options, what are their other opportunities that may you may be able to bring someone on to be supportive in a supporting role as a CFO, but not necessarily full time. And that's why we have Nelson Tepfer here today. Nelson is, this guy is incredible. He's got a master's in financial instruments and markets, finance, accounting, taxation, business law. This gentleman has a lot of knowledge and experience and talent, and we welcome you on the show, Nelson. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me on.
Happy to. I want to get right into this because there's a lot to talk about, right? And we had your partner Halle here a couple of weeks ago, and this is kind of a follow-up because we really I think this is just such an amazing and important part of anybody building a business, and I don't think business owners put enough attention to this. So that's really why I want to emphasize this again. And we'll start off by saying, I'm reading from your LinkedIn here that, to achieve organizational success, it is essential to have a directional goal. Where do you want to go and why? This can be difficult without a plan or proper guidance on how you intend to get there. Now, as a CEO, I say, well, gee, isn't that my job? To think about that. But the reality is not necessarily, because there's a lot more to it. CEO has many different hats, right? And when you wear too many hats, you may not be doing them all very well. So you need to bring in people who can help support you, provide you with insight, help provide you with direction so you can make good decisions. And folks, this is what it's all about. It's This is about making good decisions and taking good direction, and you can't do everything on your own because we just don't know everything. So it's important to bring good folks like Nelson on. So Nelson, how does that CFO fit into that scenario?
So the way you were typically describing it is actually absolutely true. I mean, the CEO does often wear many hats because they're usually the owner of the company as well. And so there's not like there's other people who can do some of those things. So sometimes they put on their CEO hat, sometimes they put on the chief cook and bottle washer hat, so it's a lot of times it's whatever needs to be done. But as companies grow in scale to what you just referenced, they definitely need different levels of skill around different areas. And usually the CFO area is one which they hit that skill wall because most business owners don't necessarily come from the finance and accounting background.
Right.
But focusing in on the area that you were describing when it comes to building that plan, the CEO very often is a lot about the vision. Like he has in his mind, he or she has in their mind, like what actually their company, they have what this thing is going to look like. They have this, dream of what this is going to take place, how this is going to look in whatever period of time.
Right.
For the CFO side of that conversation, it becomes, okay, let's help build the plan and start filling in that picture of what this is really going to look like. You have this image in your head. That's great. But now what does that actually look like in practice to be able to do this? And then to make this truly tactical, it becomes, okay, how are we going to actually measure if we're doing this? Who's responsible for helping them? What do those activities look like along the way? So for us, it is about partnering with that CEO to take what they have in their heads, make this actual plan that they can actually go ahead and work with, and then to have a path that they can follow.
Yeah, and I love that because you're so spot on because I have this clear vision. I know exactly where I want to take my new company. I know where I want to go with it. I know what I want to do, but I don't necessarily know how I'm going to get there. I have great ideas and great thoughts, but when you and that's fine. But the financial side of things is so important that you really have to stay focused on that almost 24/7, really. That's what keeps business owners up, right? Zero, and things like that. That's number one, I think, on small business owners' minds. But so, how do you support? Like, say I come in and I want to bring on your services.
Sure.
How do we get started? How does something like that even get started?
So usually the first conversation, it's interesting to me how often the conversations overlap and begin to look the same across the various size companies we work with and the various industries we work with, because we work with quite an incredible range. I think at last count, from funded startup up to a few $100 million in revenue, I think at last count also in 28 or 29 different industries. As I joke with people, that number seems to keep growing because they keep making up new industries.
Yeah.
So it's an incredibly varied what that conversation will look like, but just as how simplified or overlapping very often they become. When we start our conversation with any prospect, a lot of it is trying to understand what is it they're trying to do as a company. What is it they're trying to do? Because the problems that they have, the symptoms that they very often are, the symptoms they may be facing or experiencing are symptoms of other problems. So the challenges that are represented, we want to make sure we understand them within the context of what they're trying to build. For instance, a company that talks to me about cash flow issues that they may have. Understanding what they're building and the history of their company will allow us to say, well, you have cash flow issues because you were using the wrong accountant, for instance. When I say that is because you were basically not reporting all that much by way of profit, so you couldn't get a standard line of credit from a bank, and so you ended up with a really high rate of kind of loan instead, and that's what's affecting your cash flow now.
Yeah.
But if he just says I have cash flow problems without the rest of that information of what he has built and what he's trying to build, the solutions that we need to put in place begin to look very, very different depending on what's being built here.
Yeah, so many small business owners don't want to show any profits, right? I don't want to pay taxes.
Yeah, of course. No one likes paying taxes. I have yet to meet the person who does.
So you find that accountant that says, okay, I'll work the numbers so you're not making any money or showing any money, but then you go.
And this is why I said it was the wrong accountant. Not because again, I understand business owners who are doing it. And again, there's lots of ways to do it 100% legally. There's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
It's just understanding what are the repercussions if you do that. And from our perspective as our CFO, that's where I think the accountant, not that they did anything wrong, but didn't advise the client correctly to say, these are the ramifications if you do this. then when you're trying to go to this line of credit, you're not going to be able to get it, and therefore this is what's going to actually happen over here.
Yeah, I so agree with you. I've shouted at the top of my lungs at business owners saying, you just can't just write everything off. You need somebody to help you, support you, and understand what you're doing, and have a financial plan. And a financial plan is not, we come to the end of the year and tell your accountant, just do whatever you're going to do, but I got to pay as little taxes as possible. Financial plan.
Yes, and this goes a lot to your expertise, because there are ways to do it with advanced financial planning with other tools like this, rather than just write off more expenses within the company.
Right. And so here's a sign that, as a small business owner, here's a sign that you need a CFO, or you need the services of a CFO, because you're not planning, right? And
absolutely true.
It's all about planning. I keep telling every week, right, Kent? People plan, and I'm as guilty as anybody of that. And most of my career, I did not write down plans. I didn't have an executive summary. I didn't have a pitch deck. I didn't have any of these things. I just had the idea and I was going to run with it. But with this new business, we had to put all of that together. I cannot begin to tell you how much clarity that brings to what you're trying to do and how you're going to try and do it.
Absolutely.
It's a map, and it has moving parts, because it's not a definitive plan. I mean, you have to follow it verbatim. It's got to be flexible, because things change, right?
Absolutely. And Bill, to the point you referenced earlier about the CFO role, it's a fascinating topic for me, not just because of the business we've built in this space. So I actually do a lot of speaking on the subject in front of many business owners and business owner groups. And one of my favorite ways of starting the conversation in a room of business owners is, okay, how many of you have a CFO in the room? And very often the rooms where I'm speaking, it's anywhere between a third and a half of them will raise their hand. And my next question is, okay, great, then this should be simple. What does a CFO do? And the same two things happens almost every single time. The first is dead silence in the room. And the second is a look of panic on about half the people who raise their hand, like, I hope he doesn't call on me.
Yeah.
And the real answer, unfortunately, is there's no official definition. Other than it standing for Chief Financial Officer, all three of us in this room all know CFOs, who I will refer to nicely for the sake of this conversation, who are glorified bookkeepers. And we all know CFOs who are basically the CEO in some organizations. And therefore, what we talk about, which is what Ken pulled up over here, is, okay, what is the role of this finance and accounting function? What is it supposed to do for you? And therefore, whoever is managing or leading it, whatever title you choose to give that person, what is it that they're supposed to be doing for you?
I'm glad
so
you
in
didn't
this, I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm glad you didn't ask me those questions.
The real scarier part, and this is the joke I very often will tell, you ask 10 different CFOs what they think a CFO is or does, you'll still get 10 different answers.
Yeah.
And I've done that too in front of financial executive networking groups and other kind of financial leadership groups. But for this conversation, when we talk about, what are the different layers? So for example, in this the diagram that Ken pulled up, these are some of the top common titles that exist, or the common layers that exist within many organizations. And all those listed over there at the functional level, none of those titles truly matter, because there are some organizations that have 2 layers and there are some organizations that have 10 layers. Obviously, it adds complexity. So you want to make sure if you're adding more layers, the complexity is worth the effort. But what we're focused on is everything on the other side. It's the impact side, because that's really what makes the difference within the organization. Very often when we're having conversations with our clients, there is some version of those bottom 3 layers, those tasks, those reports, some kind of systems in place, because that's what they've been using to run their companies up until now. But those top 3 layers very often are not as addressed, and that's often why they're feeling many of the symptoms that they are when they're starting the conversation with us. There's no analytics, which leads to insight. There's no management and communication around what these pieces begin to look like. And there's no leadership, and most importantly, the strategy side of it to say, okay, this is what we've done, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to actually go achieve what we want to. Very often, when we start with many of our clients, we have to go back and review those bottom 3 layers as well, because many of those pieces were put in place when they were a fraction of their current size.
Right.
And so, yes, there's a lot of different titles that can exist within the function. But for some of our clients, it's just us and a bookkeeper or us and a bookkeeping service. So it's not about the layers of the titles that you get to put in. It is making sure everything on the impact side is being addressed.
I'm glad you said that, because as a business owner, when you talk about layers, the first thing that goes in my mind is each layer costs money. And so I'm sitting here going, all right, how many layers do I have, and can I afford it, and how many do I need? And again, can I afford it? Because that's always the owner's mindset is always, what do I need? Where do I get it? What's it going to cost? The basic question.
And that is that trap, I'll call it, that many business owners go through, is they just put more people on it. Oh, we're going to hire somebody else to do this because this isn't being done, rather than truly evaluating, okay, what is this whole thing supposed to do for you? And then you can go about and build it. And that's why what we talk about is, okay, what is the finance and accounting function? How do we help build it so it is systematic, sustainable, scalable, and perhaps most importantly, actually built to support the growth and goals of the company?
Perfect. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. It's sustainable, scalable, and building, that solid foundation, and then growing from there. Because too many business owners fly by the seat of their pants as long as they possibly can, and then all of a sudden they find themselves in a position that I'm no longer comfortable in understanding what's going on anymore.
I'll tell it to you the same way a former client of ours told it to me when we first started our conversation with him. He says, Nelson, this company is too big for me to run on gut instinct alone. Now, I love a CEO who feels free enough to share that sentiment with me. What made that one in particular so much more interesting, that was a pretty sizable operation. I'm talking about several hundred people. He had a controller there. He had quite a few people in his finance and accounting department, and that was still the way he felt.
Yeah, he took a pause and he thought about it. And they went, uh-oh.
But that happens because, to the point we referenced earlier, most business owners are not coming from the finance and accounting background. And as a result, as it develops naturally without that oversight or strategic guidance, it becomes a very operational or reactive goal, right? The books get closed. Okay, now what? And that's pretty much all that ends over there, right? They have to record everything and the books get closed. Whereas he was really looking for that guidance of, okay, now that this is closed, what insight do we have from this? What should we be doing? We have these 3 new initiatives we're investing in. What does this look like? How are we going to measure this? How are we going to know if we're successful or not? And that he wasn't getting, and that's what we're trying to build. So yes, it's the finance and accounting function, but it needs to be strategic, and it needs to be proactive, and it needs to be informing decisions.
So most business owners, and especially most that I've spoken with and worked with, they know one financial sheet. Here's where I started, here's where I spent, here's what I brought in, and here's what I got left over. And then I judge my business on that, what's left over. If it's positive, I'm like, we're good. And if it's negative, it's like, what happened?
So I boil it down usually even simpler very often when we start with many clients. They only look at 2 things, actually: top line revenue and money in the bank. That's essentially the old way they run their business, right? This is how much sales were, and this is how much money I have in my bank, and that's what I run the business. If those 2 numbers are good or moving in the right direction, I'm okay. But other than that, to your point, Bill, it's like, now what? What else do you do with this information? What does this begin to look like?
Yeah, I've had questions. I've got a friend of mine runs a business, and I said, you send people out on service calls and everything. I go, what do you charge? He goes, oh, $70. Okay, what does it cost you? And crickets. And he didn't know. I said, how can you not know what it costs you? Then how do you determine what you're going to charge? And he said, that's the industry standard. That's not a good answer.
No.
That's not atypical of small to medium-sized business owners.
Absolutely true. Almost every business owner, especially founders, have built their business because they're really, really good at delivering a product or a service. Running a business, not so much, because it's not something that's ever really gets taught. And I say this as you reference my education, where on paper you may have one of the best educations in theory that would have taught you how to run a business, and they don't teach that in school.
No, they don't. They don't. There's nowhere. But there's so much we could do a whole nother show on that. and that's part of what my new business that I'm building is to teach things that they don't teach in school, and life lessons and life skills. but hopefully get people to understand a little bit more about the financial literacy world, so they can make better decisions. And part of making a better decision is just knowing, as a business owner, that you're going to need support. You're going to need the help of someone like you, to come in and provide an understanding, and help provide direction, sustainability, scalability, all these things that you've already mentioned. But again, when do I know as a business owner? When do I know that I should be seeking out, the services of somebody of your stature?
So that's probably one of two of the most common questions we often get. When do we know we need you? And when do we know we need a full-time? And the answer really is, when you need a resource at this level, when you no longer have the insight you need to make the decisions you're trying to. If I had to boil it down to one statement, that's probably what it boils down to. Now, obviously, there are a lot of pieces of that go into that equation. But if I'm boiling it down into one statement, it's when you no longer have the insight you need to make the decisions you have to. Now, what's involved in making that insight is, sure, building out all the pieces in place that provide that insight, making sure we're measuring the right things, making sure we're reporting on the right things, making sure we're tracking, everything that's involved in that, absolutely. But if I'm boiling it down into one statement, that's really what it comes down to. When you no longer have the insight you need to make the decisions you have to.
At that point, I'm already feeling probably a little panicky. Now I'm behind, is the way I'm feeling. If instead of trying to front run things, and we can't, as business owners, we can't front run things, right? We're not taught how to run a business. So how do we know what we need or when we need it? These are life lessons that just don't ever get taught or passed down, even when you have generation to generation. So you have second generation running the business now. Well, what knowledge do they have?
So family businesses are pretty interesting. We work with quite a few of them. We work with first generation getting ready to pass the second. We work with second generation that just received it from the first. And we work with some fourth and fifth generation companies. So family businesses and family dynamics are fascinating to just watch. It's almost like you can do a whole study. You can probably do an entire show just on talking about family businesses and the dynamics of that kind of environment. But what we've very often seen, or when we get brought into family businesses, is very often, again, around some of those trigger points. First generation, they don't need as much. Sometimes they don't need as much of this outside help, we'll call it, because they've lived and breathed this company. Everything is natural to them because they built it with their own two hands.
Yeah.
But as it gets ready to move to the next generation where they didn't build it from the ground up, they don't have the full band. They don't have that full insight into what's actually going on around all these different pieces. And so the first generation, for one of our clients today, the first generation, they're bringing us in to prepare the company to be handed over to the second one. Whereas they did this, and they admit knowingly say this, like, we did this because we know all these pieces over here, but now we need to build our processes and build our systems out because they haven't built this natural, and therefore we need to put these things in place to support them. The flip side is true as well. We've been brought in by second generation when it's like, okay, mom or dad or mom and dad ran this business and they knew it was great, but now we want to take it to this next level. Now we need to put all these pieces in place because we have this, scale of what we're trying to build at this level.
Well, and that's, and that a lot depends on that too, because, we run into those second generation business owners that kind of use the company as a bank account and not run it as a business, right? We've all seen it, and experienced that, and they run it into the ground. Right?
It is scary how those numbers of what that looks like, and those statistics that look about how many businesses make it past second and third generation. It is very scary. They're looking at those numbers,
and it's interesting because so I'm fortunate to have a little backseat and watching the show with SC Johnson. So I graduated from high school up in Racine, Wisconsin, where Sam Johnson gave me my high school diploma. And my father was with the company at the time. And come full circle, my wife now works for the Johnson family. And, she's talking about how it is now going on to the fourth generation. And they're actually, the fifth and sixth are now coming along, and how they start training at 18 years old. They start bringing the family members into all the meetings and what is going on, and that's the family stuff, right? And each family member runs a different aspect of the business, and Johnson Wax is huge
Of course.
Huge company, been around a long time. So it's fascinating to listen to that.
It is. And I applaud organizations like that that really have figured out the right formula, because organizations like that, it's not just, well, because they're part of the family, they have this position in the company.
Mhm.
They have to actually be trained on this. If they can't do this, they're not going to have the role. Just because they have it, just because they're part of the family, you don't mean you automatically get the role.
But a lot of times that second, third generation, though, we bring them in and want them to be leaders. So we train them on their quote unquote leadership instead of business acumen and the the CFO part of things. As I said in the green room, a CEO can read a blueprint. The CFO sees the matrix, right? And can really look at a strategic direction where the CEO says, here's what the house is supposed to look like.
No, absolutely true. Absolutely true. And it becomes so relevant when we talk about the planning side of things. When we talk about planning, to your point, Kent, we try and separate the process. There's a difference between a goal and a measurable target. You have so many business owners, what their goals are, and they'll throw you a revenue number. You want to be 10 million. You want to be 50 million. You want to be 100 million. You want to be 1 billion, whatever the numbers are. And it's great. We like the enthusiasm for that part. But when it comes to actually planning and making that something we can take action on, it's like, okay, what does that number represent to you? What does it mean of what you're trying to build? Are you trying to be the largest in your region? Do you want to be the best one in 3 states? Do you want to be, what is that? Because when we begin to separate what the goal of what you're trying to build is, then we can come up with what the activities begin to look like and the strategy you want to put in place to help you achieve it. Because then it allows certain decisions to become binary. Does this support? I'm sorry, go ahead, Phil.
Well, do you ever look at so from the back end and then work your way towards the beginning, like an exit strategy? Start with it. I want an exit strategy. In 5 years, I want to either sell my company or I want to IPO. My company. Now, depending on which one I want to do, where do I have to be in order to do that? What position do I have to be in? If you want to do an IPO, you need to have at least $200 to $300 million to make it even begin to start being worthwhile.
That number has increased even. Now we're seeing more 500-600, but that's
crazy because it's the billionaires all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But to answer your question, absolutely. Very often when we do our planning, a process that we typically try and work and put into place is actually a 5-3-1 planning. We like the 5 years and then working back to 3 and then working back to 1 and then working back to once, specifically in that order. Because we find when you do it the other way around, you end up with step-up goals, where 1 year goal is where we are today plus a certain percentage. And then 3 year just becomes that plus a certain something. And then that 5 year becomes, So we like doing it the other way around. Let's think big picture. What does 5 begin to look like? Now, 5, you don't have to fill in every single detail on the 5, but as we bring it back to 3 and then bring it back to 1, more of those details have to be filled in because those are the things you're actually going to be taking action on and actually working on.
Yeah, a generation ago, we were looking at 20 years, right? 20 years out. And what's that 5, 10, 20-year plan? Now it's 5-3-1, and I really appreciate that because I don't think you can go more than 5 years.
No, look, it's nice to have something big and ridiculous on your wall for 10 years. I think that's good. But when we're talking about actual planning, that becomes a little bit more, that's the way I differentiate those two. I like having that. Great. Have something big and audacious and crazy on your wall for 10 years or 20 years out. Good. Keep it there.
Yeah, I always
use that as your North Star.
Yeah, I use that story about the Australians having the French make the nuclear submarines. These were not nuclear weaponized. These were just nuclear powered submarines. And it was going to take 7 years for them to build the submarine until another salesman, a very sharp salesman, went to them and said, oh, by the way, do you realize that in 7 years when that submarine is delivered, that the technology in there will all be obsolete?
Yeah.
And so I use that story to say, hey, folks, really thinking beyond 5-7 years, you're guessing. Yeah. You really are, because you have no idea what technology is going to do, how it's going to change what you do and how you do it and when you do it. And we see it happening. I was just thinking about how old I was yesterday because and remembering that there was no cell phones when I was growing up. There was no cable TV. There was no internet. There were no computers. I lived in the town in Mahwah, New Jersey, which you might know, not too far outside of Brooklyn where you're at, was IBM.
Yeah.
IBM's home base. So so computers are right in my backyard. But did I have a computer? Nope. So and then how things have so rapidly changed, even over the last 3 to 5 years. We've seen so many changes. Look at all the now all the information we get, right, and that we can get instantly, and it's all true. Don't forget that.
Absolutely. But having those goals in mind, then you can set the targets around them, because then your decisions allows them to become a little bit more binary. Does this support my goal or not? For instance, some of the points that you referenced, you want to exit within a certain period of time. Great. In order to exit, that means we need to make sure there's a good reporting package you can build in place. That's the CFO side of it. But the planning side of it, you need to make sure the CEO is replaceable almost, because if the company is entirely dependent on that business owner, they're not going to get the valuation they want. And that will usually come up in some of the due diligence processes, how involved they are in all the details of the company. You need to make sure you're not that key component. Otherwise, you're not going to get the exit you're looking for. And whatever that looks out at the end, at the other side of it, is certainly going to look a very different package, whether you're replaceable or not. But in addition, that's where you need to start planning on if you need to hit a certain number, because certain numbers mean different multiples. There are certain thresholds when it comes to different multiples when you're thinking about an exit. All of that comes into place. Then you start having those conversations. Well, should we invest in a new ERP system, right? A new software within the organization? And we get asked that a lot, because many of our clients are growing and they're coming from the standard package they may have started with, and they're thinking about what's next. And I joke with many people, me personally, I have had the privilege of working across nearly 24 ERP platforms. And they are all terrible and they're all wonderful, every single one of them.
Well, we had Amanda Russo on the show, and she's
Sure.
that processing and how important it is, because so many business owners, small, growing to medium-sized businesses, as they're growing, their systems start shutting down because they.
That's exactly right. And for us, it is not our role to do that. It is our role to know when to bring in Amanda.
Yeah.
Because we have to know what it looks like on the other side of the equation. That's our perspective, as for both myself and every member of my team have been an actual CFO before. So we come from the perspective of having actually been on the other side of this.
Okay.
Hey, for all of our listeners out there, I just want you to know that if you are a small business owner, you're not the best CFO out there, or you're looking to work with Nelson, go ahead and check them out at procfopartners.com. That's procfopartners.com. Great website. They'll be able to help you out there, answer any questions, get you information, which is absolutely fantastic. And for everybody out there too, looks like Metaverse is having a little bit of problem today out on Facebook. So if you started on Facebook, you can always join us at www.216thenet, hit the listen live, or on our YouTube channel right now. Seems to be working well, so that's good. Here's a question that was texted in for Nelson. Nelson, how do you, if you're not a CFO, how do you get the CFO to talk to you in terms that a normal person would understand?
So I'm going to answer it, perhaps a little differently than may be expecting. If your CFO is not talking to you in the terms you understand, it's the wrong CFO.
There you go.
Because in this entire conversation, yes, I may have referenced some of the technical side of things, but I'm not making this a particularly overly technical conversation. And your CFO, the one who you're working with, needs to be someone that's a fit for you. There are many CFOs who will speak entirely in technical jargon. And if that's what you need at the point in time, then yes, you want to make sure you have a CFO who can do that. But if that's not the stage where you're up to, then your CFO needs to be someone who can work with you, who you understand. The example I give, go ahead, Bill.
We have people that they like to show off, right? They like to show how smart they are and be confusing, so that they're creating the need for you to keep them on, right? Because if you don't understand it very well, then you better keep this guy around, because this person.
Other way around. It's the other way around. If you don't understand them, if they can't explain what they're doing or working on for you, or put things in the context for you to be able to understand and engage with, then how much value is there really in that kind of relationship?
such an amazing.
We get asked that a lot. Like, for instance, do we build dashboards for our clients? And what I say, we've done everything from 3-line Excel worksheets all the way up to Power BI, full whatever that looks like. For us, it entirely depends on who the client is, what they need to see, and what's going to be relevant for them in those decisions they need to make. So that goes back to your point, Ken, to the question is, if it's not relevant for them, then the fact that they don't understand them is, I would say, certainly point to being a bit of an issue.
That should be a red flag.
Well, and a lot of business owners are salespeople in small businesses, right? And salespeople have a tendency to say, we can work around that. Let's just go, right? And CFOs have a tendency to say, no, we can't work around that necessarily.
So it's the CFO's responsibility to be able to engage that business owner in what they need to be looking at and why. There are some business owners, absolutely to your point, who come from that truly sales side of it. So the role of the CFO in that kind of environment is, yes, we can work around it. This is the framework we need to have in place for which you have the wiggle room to work within. It's not like you get to go entirely out of the box and do something entirely different unless we figure out a way to do that. But it becomes, this is the framework that we have to work with it. Or if you're going to sell it this way, these are the ramifications. So you should be aware of it if you're going into those scenarios. If you price it this way, then this is what's going to happen. This is what it's going to look like. So it's not about the CFO is that. The traditional CFO, to your point, most people's minds is they're the no person, right? I remember one times when going back to a question I asked earlier, when I asked that in the room, what is the role of the CFO? One of the CEOs, who obviously has a very similar relationship to what you defined, said, to annoy me. Like, that was his immediate visceral response. What's the role of the CFO? To annoy me. It's like, okay,
We always have that compliance department.
Yeah. So it's not even compliance. It's very often people get the impression that the CFO is the no person because they're often saying, no, we can't do this. Or the impression is that that's what CFO says. Right. And the answer is, from our perspective, the right CFO will never say, oh, no, we can't do that. They may explain what the ramifications are. And again, for us, it is about putting the framework for decision-making in front of the entrepreneurs, guiding those decisions to say, okay, we can do this or this. I know this is what you want to do. These are the ramifications of what this would look like if we do this. I would think we should do this, and this is why, or we can come up with a different solution for it. That's the role of the CFO in that kind of process. It shouldn't be to be the no person.
Right. Well, if you run into an Elon Musk and he says, I don't care, just do it. Make it happen. I'm doing this, so you go figure it out. But I want to point one thing out here with Pro CFO Partners. We had Hala on, and now we've had Nelson here, but you have a much larger team, because you had mentioned being able to work with the right person and having that fit. And so I wanted to point out that you have a very large team that has a great deal of experience in many areas.
We're up to almost 50 CFOs on our team right now. Mm-hmm. And the fit, to the point that you just made, Bill, and going back to our conversation, Ken, the fit becomes really, really important. For as long as I've been doing this, I've recognized that, yes, the industry experience and knowledge is helpful when you get started. But the fit with the business owner defines the long-term success of what we're able to help them achieve. And so having built a team like this, the industry experience and knowledge, we're now able to leverage off of each other because we meet as a team on a weekly basis. We discuss the different things. We can leverage each other's knowledge and experience within specific industries and nuance. But therefore, I can actually pair the CEO, the business owner, the leadership team with the CFO who will be the right fit for them.
Yeah, I want to get that out because that's so very important. Because a lot of folks look at somebody who may be in the consulting world or whatnot is they're just one-man teams. And this is truly not the case. And you point out the importance and value of fit. So I wanted to make sure folks understood you have that team so that, if Nelson isn't the fit or Hala isn't the fit, that you have others that are. Mm-hmm. That can be.
So the running joke in our firm is they don't let us work directly with clients anymore. And I do miss it. I truly enjoy being able to work directly with them. So we are still involved very often in managing our clients, identifying who's the right fit, figuring out what their issues are to see who's the right CFO, who's the fit for them. But yeah, we as our company scaled and grow, we've joked with people, we've grown to a size where we now need to take our own advice. And for those of you who are aware, it is so much easier to tell other people what to do than for us to do it ourselves. but we do use our own tools. We use our own frameworks. We use our own, our own methodology in how we run our own company as well.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So right now, there's two terms out there, Nelson, for a lot of small business owners that I think a lot of small business, medium size, let me rephrase that. Young business owners, so people who have 5 years or less in business, have never bumped up against, and that's inflation and recession. As a CFO, how do you guide business owners with that? Because normal young business owners, again, are reactionary, I think, a little bit, and get to the party a little too late.
We call that transitory. We don't say recession.
Well,
That stuff anymore. It's transitory.
yes, but in truth, that's a little bit of the CFO looks down the telescope a little bit to see what's going on. Help us understand a little bit of that.
Absolutely. And this is so relevant for today. It's been so relevant for some time, even before it made headlines. And we get to see this across all the different companies and sizes and locations that we work with. So we kind of have almost this little microcosm into what's actually going on, where the rubber meets the road type of thing. And yeah, there certainly have been some really big factors and headwinds that we've been facing for quite a while. Again, whatever terminology becomes acceptable for today for us to use to describe it. And the real answer becomes is understanding how some of those things will impact your company. If you're in, what kind of business are you in, and what will those pieces that you referenced before, how will that impact? For instance, a company which relies on certain types of funding for its operation in a good way, not because you don't have cash, just because that's the way the cycle works. Recognizing the cost of capital increase of what that looks like from the inflationary cycle, how that's going to impact your interest rate, how that's going to impact then your cash flow, how that's going to impact your profitability if that's what you rely on to fund the company to make sure that you remain operational. So that's where inflation is, we're seeing among the biggest impacts is access to capital and the impact that the cost of capital has on many organizations.
Well, and
Your credit.
And pricing. Pricing of your product or service.
So
right?
Pricing becomes a separate conversation because pricing is something we've been very proactive about from the beginning. Everyone thinks of the CFO as we're the hatchet man, right? We come in and cut costs and fire everybody, all the fun stuff like that. And that's not the case because yes, we want to make sure costs are correctly managed, but pricing has a much greater impact on the bottom line than cost cutting does. And so, yes, we want to manage costs. We as former CFOs, we know and understand what some of these cost structures should look like and which vendors are the right fit, or which vendors are you no longer having the right value from those professional relationships, and therefore should be looking to upgrade or replace. But pricing is a very proactive, strategic conversation that needs to be happening on a regular basis. This is not a once a year, great, let's raise our prices 6.3% because that's what our salespeople said, this is what we'll still pay or not pay type of thing. Pricing is a dynamic, strategic conversation that happens on a more regular basis for many of our clients. So yes, they've been raising their prices throughout the past number of years because as their costs have gone up, we have to make sure the pricing still remains in line.
Yeah, and that process should start even before you open your doors.
Absolutely.
Right? And this is something else I try to instill amongst my listeners. So many things need to be done in startup phase before you actually open your doors or hang that shingle on your door to say I'm open for business. This is a major part, and I'm going through this myself, and it's like what does the market bear, and what are the funds that you need in order to accomplish what you're looking to accomplish? Because the only way you're going to get that is either borrow it or sell something, right?
Yeah. And this comes down to answer both of those questions is truly understanding your model, what those inputs really look like, and to understand what when some of those pieces change, what does it look like at the end? What does your profit margin look like at the end? What does your cash flow look like at the end, facing all of these changes? The recessionary side of things, again, whether we choose to term it a recession or not, the slowdown, the whatever that looks like, it's understanding where your market position is within the economy to say, okay, what are the dynamics that will affect what we're doing? So again, as business owners, very often entrepreneurs by nature are far more optimistic than the general population. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. They have to be. If you think about what they're actually doing and what they're risking when they go out and choose to start a business, that's fine. Us as their CFO, it becomes, okay, when we're doing our budgeting and forecasting, we now need to add different scenarios to say, okay, this is what we're planning. This is our, if this doesn't happen, and if certain things change and this whole slows down, this is where we need to plan. So, for instance, for many of our clients, as we look ahead towards next year, it becomes, if things change within this period of time, what are the actions we need to take?
Yeah.
Do we need to change our capital structure? Do we need to cut more costs? Do we need to, unfortunately, let some people go if these things don't actually happen? But it becomes planning for it today, because if we wait to that reactionary side of things, Bill, as you referenced, then it's already too late. Then you've already held that too long.
It's always better to be proactive. And I like that you pointed out, it's not a conversation you have once a year. It's throughout the year that you have the conversation. It's because, look, different things come into play that people don't even see coming, right? So, Kent, you brought up the recession, inflation, and stuff. But what people aren't seeing on the backside here is we now have a record high amount of credit out there on the books, right? There's something ridiculously large, $800 billion. We have maxed out our credit cards. And this is interesting because I just saw this on the news yesterday. And the gentleman came on and he said, folks, what you need to do is you need to, like for Christmas, set an amount of dollars that you're willing to spend on each person. Stick to it. Use your credit cards for that. And then in January, cut your credit card up. And I laughed. I'm like, go ahead, use your credit card. Go ahead and run it on up however you want to. But in January, you better cut that up because you don't want to use it anymore. And what people don't understand is the backside of this is people are going to have less money to spend, right? Because they've got greater debt and that they have to be paying back, or they'll default on it. And so what we're doing in essence is we'll be contracting the what's the word I'm looking for? We're contracting the monies that
discretionary spending. So our clients that rely on discretionary spending, absolutely, we're having those conversations as to say, yes, you've been growing so rapidly over this period of time, but let's build in a scenario where that changes as we move into next year. For some of our clients, we're already starting to see some of that slow down around some of those pieces. It's not like, oh no, the world is ending type of thing. We're not the doom and gloom CFO side of things. So it's about, okay, this is what's happening, or this is what we need to be prepared for what's happening. These are the action steps we're going to take, the action items we will put in place if that actually goes in this direction. It just becomes about being prepared for it.
Wouldn't it be nice to prprepare for that as opposed to watching it in the back of the head?
It would. We think it would be nice to prepare for that. Yes.
Nelson, help our listeners as well understand. A lot of young owners again are going to be, hey, I met a guy. I know Bill Hasse through the chamber. He seems smart. I wanted to make him my CFO. So a lot of people, young business owners, tend to choose maybe somebody in their circle who took an accounting class or something like that, and says, hey, let me be your CFO. And here you guys have a business model out there at procfopartners.com that says, hey, let's get a CFO in here and help you. How do you walk people through that and build that trust in a virtual sense? Because perhaps you have a CFO who lives in New Mexico who's on your team that wants to be that fits with me here in Illinois.
So this two parts to that conversation. First of all, we have CFOs all over the country, and yes, if it's something that we can actually go in person, this is not strictly a virtual kind of engagement. Very often we do go on site and actually see what's actually happening with our clients. Depending on their industry, that becomes actually more important, because sometimes you just need to see their operation, what they're actually doing, to be able to give different advice or advise around different areas. But to your point around, very often when we start with many of our clients, they have something in place, whether it's some kind of bookkeeper, controller, they have something in place. And I've had numerous conversations, actually quite a bit more recently, where we have a controller in place. We're not sure if they can grow into the CFO role. So what's the difference between the two? And they're asking that question to us because they kind of know they're not getting all that they need from this function. And they're trying to figure out what are the right pieces that exist there. And from our perspective, it's not about changing or replacing what you have in place. It's about, again, it's understanding what this whole function is supposed to do, what the whole framework begins to look like to say, okay, can this person do this or not?
Well, there's a lot of-
Usually, and I hate to say it this way, usually if they're asking us the question, they already know the answer. They just want somebody else to tell it to them.
Well, there's a lot of pressure, though, to bring people from within up.
Yes.
We have a lot of pressure to do that, as opposed to bringing outside somebody in.
And we've actually done that. We've mentored sitting people to actually grow within those roles if they had the capacity to do it.
Yeah.
We've absolutely done that for us, because what we look at is we truly believe most organizations do not need a full-time CFO. They need help building their function correctly. They need help making sure all the right pieces are in place. They need help with the planning and strategic side of things. But on an ongoing basis, that should not be a 40, 50, 60-hour-a-week job for somebody who's at this compensation level. A full-time experienced CFO is pretty expensive.
Yeah, well, but you're right. You need to know, as the owner or CEO of a company, you need to know what you need to know. Let's say, it's because bringing somebody in and learning. Just understanding that, all right, these are the things I need to know, and I need to keep my head into the game here. But that doesn't mean I'm doing that work. It just means I have to understand what it is I need or who I need, and get them in the right, get the right person in the right position. And again, there's all that pressure to bring up from within, but it's, you may not have that person available to you at that time.
Absolutely. And this goes back to the framework that we're trying to build. Kent, if you want to pull up the flywheel image as well, going back to where we started the conversation a little bit. For us, in our role as a CFO, very often we're the ones in the middle of that flywheel, making sure everything turns.
Okay.
But diving in and out of each of those areas to build them in support of the growth and goals of the company. And it's that capacity. There we go. Thanks, Kent. So we're the ones in the middle of this flywheel. Again, we're making sure this all turns, but diving in and out of each of these areas to build them. So it's that capacity to be able to recognize what the full framework needs to deliver and what these different areas are and how they need to be built to support the company where it is today and where it's trying to go tomorrow. So yes, you have very often people assume that CFO role is, okay, great, so you close my books. And I'm like, yeah, of course you want to make sure your books are closed both timely and accurately. But obviously this function is quite a bit more than that. We joke with all of our clients, you don't pay us our rates to do your books. We want to make sure they're done correctly. We'll train a mentor, whoever is doing it, sure. But that's not what you want to bring in somebody at this level to do. The traditional life cycle of a CFO within many growing companies, again, if they're brought in, usually it may be the first 3 to 6 months that A, they're figuring out how the phones work, and B, solving the biggest issue of why they were brought in. They spend the next 12 months being brought into all different kinds of areas you should not be paying a CFO salary for. And they spend the next 6 months looking for the exit, because the average tenure of a full-time CFO for many of these organizations is 18 to 24 months.
Wow.
And that's why, from our perspective, it's truly understanding what needs to happen here. We want to build this function correctly. But you don't need that on a full-time basis to build this function correctly. Otherwise, you end up paying way too much for way too long and not getting the value of what you need along the way. So let's build this function correctly. So for us, we are their CFO just on a part-time basis, very often for years, because it becomes about what is the value in our experience and expertise in guiding these companies and building this function correctly.
Yeah, I'm looking at this flywheel here, and it's definitely putting ideas and thoughts into my mind. That's for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, the systems and processes area, for instance, it becomes the reason why this is both iterative and it's a flywheel function that we chose to represent this is, A, it is not just a checklist. It's not like, okay, great, this is done, this is done, this is done. It definitely is an iterative process and going round and round. Not only does each area cause the momentum for the next one, but you take out one of these functions and the whole thing kind of grinds to a halt.
Yeah.
And so we like the goals and strategies is bigger for a reason, is because that is often, again, that guiding light around what some of the rest of the pieces look like. But when we get into the systems and processes conversation, what's going on day to day that makes the company tick is where we think of that area. And so often those pieces, the company has outgrown what they have in place. Like we had a client we were speaking to where it took them 4 to 6 weeks to send out an invoice after they finished a project. You can imagine what that does to their cash flow if that person are starting the process to send out the invoice until that far down. Yeah. Worst reason ever to lose a client is because you can't build them fast enough. And unfortunately, this company did. They lost a client because they could not build them fast enough. Now, this was back when they used to let me work with clients. So when I started actually working directly with this company, I was trying to figure out why it took 4 to 6 weeks, and basically would go through 6 different departments within the organization. Again, tracking down why this was actually happening. I found their operations manual that they put in place when they were literally 1/10 of their current size. And in this operations manual, it had 6 things listed as a checklist of what needed to happen before the invoice would be sent out. Great. The problem was when they put that in place, it was one person doing all of those. And as the company grew and that became 6 different people and then 6 different departments, no one stood back and said, well, this doesn't make sense anymore. And so as a result, it literally went through 6 different departments before it was sent out. And it took them 4 to 6 weeks to send out this invoice. Now, we cleaned that up and they invoice within 5 days now. But that just highlights what we're referring to, what all these different pieces begin to look like. And that's where it becomes understanding the full function of how these pieces have an impact on the next and how these pieces have an impact on the company as a whole is that CFO's perspective. It's not about the title. We joke with our clients, we don't care, call us the cook. We don't care what you call us. It's not about the title. It's about understanding the perspective we're bringing and guiding these organizations to help them achieve their goals.
Well, the interesting thing I see in this flywheel is that you allow revenue, you allow money, you allow that financial piece to be a tool instead of a goal.
Correct. And that becomes really, really key as companies grow and scale. It becomes really important because the decisions you make are around those goals. The tools that you use to get there are what all these pieces begin to look like.
Yeah.
You want to be the largest in your state. You want to grow to whatever that is. Okay, great. Let's understand what those pieces look like. Yes, it's going to translate to a revenue number we're going to put as a target. Sure. But let's first understand the goal of what we're working towards so we can build out the plan to help you get there.
Yeah, I love it.
I like that because it's, a lot of folks, this may appear to be more complicated, or we might bring it as a business owner might bring into our minds that this is too complicated for me to think about. But the reality is it's not. It's just you don't have that mindset. You don't have that knowledge and information. And that's true with many aspects of your business. So that's why you bring special people in to handle the different aspects of basically, like I say, cover your weaknesses.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Yes.
People say, work on your weaknesses because you already know what your strengths are. It's like I kind of stick with your strengths and don't get help for your weaknesses, because if you're spending so much time on your weaknesses, you're wasting time.
That is so true. And again, fun, quick story that highlights that. I was working with a small law firm. This is a number of years ago. And I basically asked the managing partner of the firm who I was working with. Managing partner of the firm is usually the rainmaker of the firm. And I said, okay, if we can free up 1 day per week of your time, about 4 days a month, how much more revenue do you think you can generate? And he throws out a very impressive number because he's obviously very good at what he does. And I said, great, 2 things. First of all, I'm charging you way too little. But then second of all, if I tell you this is the amount you need to spend in order to free up this time, then it becomes a simple equation to say whether we should or shouldn't do this. And what this particular business owner, what I was trying to demonstrate for him, he needed to replace one of his key people because what he was doing without realizing it was sitting in the office and babysitting this person because they weren't up to the level that he needed them to be. And he was handling some of the other tasks that he needed to hire a different person to do. But when we put it in the context of now we understand this is the decision we're trying to make, these are the parameters that go into making this decision, it becomes much easier to make that decision. And now, so he did that and he cleared that revenue target within 4 months of what he thought he'd be able to generate.
Yeah. That's a great point. And another reason to bring in the proper people. I know we only have about a minute left here. Okay, 2 minutes. We're good. We lost you, Ken. We lost your voice.
Oh, I should take my microphone off mute. Always know. Must be my first show.
But Nelson, I can't thank you enough for coming on and helping bring a little more clarity to the importance of value of what a CFO brings to a business. I could say so many different things, but bringing them in early before you even get going and
have the conversation is absolutely true. Have the conversation. You can choose when you need to actually make the decision to bring in the resource. Have the conversation as early as you can.
Learn about those needs that you're going to have. Maybe you don't need that person right now, but at least understand that by having that conversation when you will need that person.
And we've had that exact conversation with prospects. They reach out to us and we explain to them, this is not what you need yet. Here is 2 different things I would suggest you put in place first. And if they come back to us at whatever point in time, great. If not, they're more successful on their way.
Just amazing stuff. Again, for more information about what Nelson and his team does, go to ProCFOPartners, that's more than one.com. So ProCFOPartners.com. It's a great website, and they've got links on there how they can help if you need more cash, if you need financial insights and reports, no matter what size of business you are, from a service business, just a solo entrepreneur, all the way up to a corporation. They're here to help you out, and there's no better time than right now to really reach out to them.
So I would think very important time to reach out, because we're going to see a lot of new activity that many people have never seen before coming up in the next 12 months.
That's right. So for all of us here at 216 Net, Nelson, thanks for joining us this morning on Innovative Strategies with Bill Hasse here. We appreciate it. And if you're ever in the neighborhood, we'll always have you on. So appreciate you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Kent.
Yeah, don't fly to Chicago in the wintertime. You know that one.
That's right. All right. For all of us here at 216 Net, thanks for getting caught in the net with us this morning. Have a great day, everybody.